Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to the Mace Sci-Fi Film Festival. We're continuing on with our interviews tonight. I'm delighted to say that we have with us tonight Eric Patrick Cameron, fantastic director, Irish-American director, and we've also got Gary O'Toole back with us again from Blabba the Hutt. You're both very welcome, guys.
Hello, gents.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to talk to you guys about Star Wars. This is awesome.
Fantastic, Eric. Yeah, you're down. I'm taking it you're not in the States. That looks like you're in Kerry.
Yeah. So I'm in Dingle, Ireland. We just had the world premiere for the movie that's about to screen tomorrow at the May the 4th Festival. So we premiered it on Sunday the 30th at Fial na Baltanin, which is our annual arts festival here in Dingle. And as you can see, I'm in a pub called Foxy John's, which is where they had the after party for Star Wars: The Last Jedi when they filmed here in Kerry. And there's a cool little scene in the movie that takes place here at Foxy's. So I figured if I'm going to do the interview, why not have a nice backdrop for it?
Fantastic title for your documentary. I'm a big fan of documentaries. The Space Western of the Southwest. Can you tell us a little bit about the documentary that you've been spending? You spent a good time on this, yeah?
Yeah. It was interesting because I attended the festival last year, the Comic-Con, and met James and everyone, and was in the middle of kind of wrapping up filming. I was just about to go out to the Skelligs a couple weeks later, a week and a half after the festival. So I started pre-production on the movie about a year and a half ago. And it was kind of those first steps of figuring out what exactly the movie should be, emailing the right people and certain publicists, trying to secure interviews and whatnot. And since then, it's kind of just been a year and a half of rejections and acceptances and editing and just the grueling process of figuring out how to structure a documentary, because most of the stuff I've really ever done has been scripted. So it was kind of a step out of my comfort zone, but it at the same time felt comforting because it was about Star Wars. So it was about something I loved so dearly. So it didn't really feel, even though it was stressful, it didn't feel like work or anything.
Now, Gary and I are well used to the Star Wars story down in Portmagee. We've been down there for 5 years, so we're really familiar with it. We've talked to all the guys that were involved with The Last Jedi down there. We've heard some fantastic stories from Jared in the Moorings pub down in Portmagee, but I wouldn't be as familiar with the stories that happened down in Dingle. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the people that you met and the people that were involved, the locals that were involved down there, and you can just sort of give us a flavour of what we're going to see in the documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of go back a second, talk about Portmagee. The second half of the movie does definitely take place in Portmagee, and Valentia Island is more of kind of the adventure onto the Skelligs. But prior to that is very much a spotlight on the filming that they did in Dingle, because it's something that isn't really talked about much, both from the general press and books and other docs about the filming of the movie. Everyone kind of knows the Skellig Islands as the filming location, but probably about 90% of the shots that you end up seeing in The Last Jedi were actually filmed here in the mainland in Dingle. They only had 2 days, Rian Johnson and his crew, to film on Skellig Michael in September of 2015. So about 4 or 5 months before principal photography began. The Skellig shoot was a 2-day pre-shoot, that they called it. And it was because they were not allowed to film on the Skelligs during their principal photography schedule. So the production designer, Rick Heinrich, who has since worked with Ryan again on Glass Onion, recreated the Skellig Island. So Skellig Michael, he built all of the beehive huts and everything here on the mainland in Dingle. So for people that want to come here for a nice weekend getaway, they can hire a private tour or something. They'll take them all around the hills and Slaya Drive and Connor Pass, and you'll be able to see kind of all the filming locations. And a good chunk of the iconic scenes were filmed here in Dingle.
You've been down there, Gary?
Yeah, I have indeed. We had some involvement down there. It was nice to see Eric talk, showcase what happened down in Ballyferter in the school when Jonas popped along. But also, it was nice to see. The Thala Siren pop up as well, because that's a particular location that seems to fly under the radar quite a bit.
That was such a fun place to visit too. I mean, it was a really funny story, especially hearing how the one I interviewed for that, her name is Kira Barrett. So it was really interesting to kind of hear her perspective on having seen that. I mean, and how bizarre that must have been to have that huge helicopter just plop this thing. I mean, they built it out at Pinewood in England, but they shipped it over and they just flew it in on a helicopter, and it landed. They kind of reconstructed it on Camino Beach here on the peninsula. I mean, it was fascinating, just kind of thinking about what people must have thought when this huge, bizarre creature was being flown in by helicopter. So that was one of the more funny stories, definitely.
And there was no stagecraft or volume technology required. I mean, we get a good look at sort of the setup by Cian Shabade as well, which I think for me, Skellig gets all the credit, but the setup along Cian Shabade was just incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean, so that was kind of their most grueling process of recreating the Skellig set, and I mean, just a metal road. I think it was metal. I'm sorry, I'm just going to turn my ringer off. I very much apologize. But like, they built this huge road to get up to the top of Count Chabelle, because they needed all the trucks and all the people, and it wasn't drivable the way it was. And all of the equipment that they were lugging and the set design, it was incredible. And also for anyone who watches that is kind of inspired to take a trip out to Dingle, it's a beautiful ride, and it's a beautiful little stop just to kind of see the sceneries. And specifically with the Count Chabelle part, when they were filming, it's a big fishing area. So normally a lot of the local fishing people that's where they would catch their fish. A story that didn't make it into the final cut of the documentary, but the production actually ended up having to pay the local fishing people to kind of stay out of the waters, and reimburse them for their losses, because they just couldn't have all of those fishing boats coming in and out during photography. So it was really interesting the lengths that they went through to kind of pull this off. I mean, and I feel like a lot of people wouldn't be able to tell that it was all done not on Skellig.
All for a puffin documentary.
All for a puffin, yeah.
You mentioned that was your first time making a documentary, so I would gather you're more used to independent short films and feature films that you've been working on over the past few years. So what was the departure like for you from moving from, say, indie fiction or factual films to a documentary?
Yeah, so well, I started really just making shorts when I was 9 years old. I got an iPod Touch for my birthday, and since then I've kind of just been making shorts on my own. And I've worked on a couple. I haven't directed a feature. I've worked on a bunch of features in small capacities, and I'm really fascinated by the kind of traditional narrative structure of film, and that's where my heart is as far as filmmaking goes. But when the opportunity presented itself to be here in Dingle and make a movie, the first thing that came to mind was something about Star Wars. And for a while, you would just talk to a lot of the locals, and it seemed that everyone pretty much had a story about when Star Wars was here. So I kind of just wanted to make a movie about that. And to me, it's still really, I mean, there's still things that I don't know about the production here, even though I just spent a year and a half making a movie about it. I mean, I'll learn things every day just talking to people. So it's really fascinating. I mean, as far as the process of the doc goes, that was probably the most stressful part, was that, you know, as much as I planned in pre-production, I was in pre-production about 4 months or so. Everything changed. I mean, the entire movie changed really up until a couple weeks ago. Things were still changing when I was still trying to lock picture. I mean, the whole Skellige trip, which is highlighted in the film, that was a number of different hurdles to jump through, and that was incredibly unpredictable. So I feel like, I mean, also the same thing can be said with narrative. I mean, doc or whatever, everything is always changing. It's just with doc, there's no script. So when you're editing the movie, you're also kind of writing the movie. So and also when you're really just kind of one person doing it, it ends up being really overwhelming. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think we all just have a huge love for Star Wars. So that really triumphs over the hardships of making a movie, is when you love something so much. You just keep going until it's done.
Who did the edit for your film?
I did. Yeah, I was the director, producer, wrote it, because I ended up writing all of my narration, and edited. But I guess I can also give a credit to my composer, who, in a sense, when he composed the music, that kind of gave me the visuals of how I wanted to edit it, because the music for me, I think, is my favorite part of the movie. It's 100% an original composition from Paul Keegan, who is an up-and-coming musician, performer, man of many trades, and his music, it sounded like John Williams sent me some outtakes from The Last Jedi, and I got to use that. So that definitely helped piece the edit together. And I think without that, I don't think the movie would be done, and I don't think it would be anywhere as good, because that music is just amazing.
Was the Sorry, I was going to ask, was the edit the hardest part? Because, you know, with a story like that, and from the beginning you tell part of your story as well, and we bounce around everything from Star Tours to Star Wars Celebration in Orlando. So what was it like trying to condense everything down and keep it to sort of a 35-minute running time? Was that always the plan, or was that something that was constantly changing as the shoot went on?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I started getting interviews and a lot of B-roll, I realized that I want to keep the movie under 40, because most festivals that you submit to, when you submit as a short, it's got to be under 40. And then if you push the over 40, you're in competition with features. And I didn't want to be in competition with features. I kind of wanted them to do their own thing. I think the edit was there. I'll be completely honest, the entire thing was probably the hardest part. I mean, each part of the journey, I think, had its own challenges. The edit was definitely the most frustrating, because it just ends up being me in front of a computer, scratching my head, pacing back and forth across the room, trying to figure out what's going to work and what's not. But I mean, shooting on the Skelliges was also, I mean, just getting there was remarkably hard. And kind of the missing piece of the puzzle of the whole story was what I felt was Ryan's input. And that was also kind of a process to get. I mean, that was the last thing I ended up shooting, thankfully. So that was each kind of piece of the way between production and post-production ended up being difficult. But yeah, the editing was, if I had to choose one, editing was definitely the most time consuming.
And that's why I asked you the question, because why I asked who did the edit, because it is so difficult when you were the writer, you're the director, and you're the editor at the same time. That is really difficult, because you, as an editor, you need to be ruthless. And, you know, when you're very close, and, you know, when you were very close and passionate to something that you know it's all yours, you're putting your heart and your soul into it. That's a very difficult thing to do, is sit in the edit room and cut away. I would imagine if you had 35 mil film, there's bits and pieces all over the floor. I would imagine that's got some super stuff in it that you just couldn't put in.
I wish I was able to shoot on 35 or 16 or something, but yeah, oh my God. I think by the end of everything, between B-roll, interviews, everything, there was easily a week's worth of footage when you look at the amount of hours everything tallied up to be. I mean, I was out here living in Dingle for 4 months and was pretty much shooting something every day just because it's such a photogenic town. And everything I shot, whether it was on a phone, on a camera, didn't matter. Everything went into one hard drive, and it was all up for grabs for the doc. So there was so much to go through, and there were so many shots that I loved that just didn't have a place in the story. I mean, there were even some parts of the interviews that kind of pained me to cut because they were such fascinating stories, but for one reason or another just didn't really work for the structure. And for me also, the biggest thing was pacing. I really wanted this to kind of just fly by, and the last thing I wanted was for people to be bored. So if there was something that, even if it was a story I loved, if the pacing just wasn't there, I just had to cut it.
Is that maybe something that's underappreciated in the independent side, film side of things, where you may have, let's say, a piece, a shoot, an interview that you would absolutely love to put in, but sacrificing that for the overall flow and the tonality of the final piece? Was that a case of you having a lot of those decisions to make with, as you said, the B-roll and the footage which eventually didn't go in?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard because, I mean, once you kind of shoot something that's like your kid, so having to cut it is really difficult. But at the end of the day, what really matters most is story. So if it really just doesn't fit, or if it slows the story down, sometimes as much as you love it, I hate saying it, but you got to cut it. I mean, it was interesting because even if I don't know if either of you have listened to the director commentary for The Last Jedi that Rian Johnson did, but he talked about some of the deleted scenes that, I mean, Luke's third lesson with Rey was cut, ended up being cut from the movie, and he just explained how much he loved those scenes, just the way it was written, the way it was shot, the way it was edited, but for one reason or another, when it's cut together with the rest of the movie, it just doesn't jive as well as other scenes. So I definitely found myself kind of in that situation where, as much as I loved it, the rest of the movie is a lot more important than kind of one piece. So if one piece just didn't drive right, I had to cut it, unfortunately. There wasn't, I mean, there weren't too, that didn't happen too often, thankfully. I mean, definitely a couple stories, like the one I mentioned earlier about the fishing people. That was kind of hard to cut because I thought it was really interesting. But thankfully, I think all of my favorite stuff ended up making it one way or another.
What I thought was was good about it. This could have easily been a special features doc that'd be on one of the at the end of The Last Jedi. You'd just sort of flick through it and scan through it, but it wasn't. It was a really interesting piece. Now, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm from Ireland, so I was very interested in what all your characters had to say about the shoot. Again, the score. Gary and I are great fans of a really good score. I think every interview we've done.
I'm sorry, Dave. I lost you for a minute. I'm sorry. Is my connection okay?
Yeah, you're a little bit frozen there for a second, but you're okay now.
I'm okay now?
Yeah, I was just
you're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry.
maybe hopefully it's
How's
your,
that now?
yeah, that's good. Yep, that's okay. I was I don't know whether you got it, but what I was saying was, this could have been a documentary that could have been on, on disc 2 of The Last Jedi and the special features, and you could scan,
Thanks.
that's what it could be. I found it incredibly interesting, to be honest with you, because and I said to Gary, maybe I'm a little biased because I'm Irish, and I was very interested in the Irish side, the Irish connection, and then but when it did go to the States and when it was at the cons and the conventions and the interviews that were in, I really enjoyed it. Your running time, you're right about the festivals, because as a festival director, everything's about time. It's all about time management. So what you try to do is you try to get the audience the best possible films you can squeeze into, say, a 2-hour short film program. The magic number for an action film, or the magic number is around 15 minutes. In documentaries, it's a little bit more. So documentaries in Ireland, a short documentary, 25, 30 minutes, thereabouts. You were at 35. But I didn't feel that it was 35 minutes, to be honest with you, and that's a really good sign.
Thank you. That makes me really happy. That's what I tried for the most. I mean, again, for me, pacing is everything. I love movies that just fly by, and I mean, I think that's something that's really special about Star Wars is that I feel like all of the movies are just so well paced, and it's really hard to get that now. I mean, the unfortunate thing about kind of filmmaking in the 2020s and the age of social media is that a lot of the attention span from viewers has decreased exponentially over the last number of years. So really, if pacing isn't there, no one's going to want to watch what you make. So it means a lot that it didn't feel like 35 minutes to you. So thank you.
I think the term we would use is nobody likes filler.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the same thing can be said for television. I mean, filler it slows down the pacing of a project, and it just makes people not want to watch anymore. So I hope there's no filler in this.
Yeah, and we actually had an interesting debate on a previous episode about episodic television, and maybe it doesn't really apply for documentaries, but filler could be seen as one of two ways. It could be seen as something that's simply filling a gap, or it could be seen as something to, obviously it does slow down the story, but maybe you see a different perspective or a different point of view, if you will, for the main characters within the story. So filler is not always a bad thing, but it seems that word filler seems to have taken on a negative assumption at times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when the Clone Wars was airing, you can kind of classify a number of episodes or a number of arcs as filler, but so many of those arcs ended up being the most iconic in the whole series because of just the way they built those characters and the new worlds they introduced us to, even though it may not have had anything to do with the whole story of the season or of the show. The filler episodes in the Clone Wars just really shine bright. So yeah, sometimes filler can be great. Now it seems like just a very general television and general media. Filler just sometimes ends up just making people disinterested. So again, I'm glad that didn't happen with this. So I guess maybe I cut the right stuff.
No, I think Dave would agree with me that it certainly didn't, and Dave touched on it. The score, the soundtrack. I was lucky enough that my last interview was actually with the composers of The Bad Batch, and they brought up the Kiner Bros. Yes. And they brought up a really interesting thing, and I think it's quite important for a documentary which you're producing. And it was essentially that you can have the greatest piece of music ever written, but unless you understand the emotional tonality and the point of view of the storytelling, if it doesn't fit, it's just not worth putting it in. And with your docu. At the start, we see the craziness of going to. I'm not sure whether that was Disneyland or Walt Disney World with Star Tours, and then we see the
It was
craziness of
Disney World, Orlando. Yes.
Orlando, and then you see the craziness of Star Wars Celebration. So here you have this sort of futuristic Star Wars, and it looked like Star Wars Weekend was in there as well.
Yes. Star Wars Weekends was in there. Yeah.
So here you have this sort of very Hollywood, big budget production of Star Wars, and yet it comes to a little emerald in a galaxy far, far away. So I think the score did a really good job of balancing that out and linking it together.
Thank you very much for saying that, Gary. I'm gonna make sure I tell Paul that. I mean, he's such a dear friend of mine. The really cool thing about how we worked on this was that I think we just have a really good read on what we think of each other's work. I mean, he ended up just producing a musical, and I was workshopping that again with him. But when he did the music for this, it was a year ago. And it was basically me just telling him, okay, I have this many chapters. This chapter is about this, that, the other thing. I want the feeling of this one to be this. And then I want, the Skelligs to feel like this. I kind of want the asteroid field from Empire, kind of a spin on that when, stuff goes wrong. And he ended up doing all of the music in a week and a half. Which blew my mind, again, without any picture, which is incredible. I mean, it wasn't like most movies, they'll score for picture. And this very much wasn't the case. It was very much just him reading off a bunch of texts, and he made it work. So thanks for complimenting the music, because that means a lot to us, and I'll pass that along.
I'm still thinking about the running time, Eric. It's just we had a brilliant documentary that I'm involved with a film festival in Dunleary in County Dublin, and it's been running for the past 14 years, and we got a documentary in there, I think about 2018 or 19. It was just prior to COVID, and it was about the UK 501st Garrison. It's called Heroes of the Empire. And it's about what the garrison they do for charities, their costumes, the some great stories about, there's some very touching scenes in it as well, where we show the 501st, that, children's funerals and stuff like that. And that was a documentary that could have been 20 minutes. That ended up 59 minutes long. And I know I'm a Star Wars fan, but I had a panel of filmmakers that, that weren't in the 501st. They love all sort of movies, and they thought that documentary, it didn't feel like 59 minutes. It just flowed so well. It's on YouTube, Eric. They sold it to Sky Arts, I think. Did pretty. Right. Sky Arts is Sky TV channel. Did pretty well there. And now
I'm sorry, what was the name of it again?
Heroes of the Empire, directed by Tom Long. 59 minutes long. But if you're into Star Wars and documentaries in particular, it's well worth a watch, but you just don't feel 59 minutes. I think once you've got a really good, interesting story like you have, time doesn't matter. And I'm just sort of wondering there about your flaw with, the edit. Would you ever think about maybe doing say a 90-minute version of it?
Director's cut.
Yeah, exactly, Gary. Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Release the Cameron cut.
Did it cross your mind? That's what I'm asking, I suppose.
It was definitely a thought. Honestly, I think if I were to kind of do a reboot or a director's cut, I would end up coming back here again for a long, another extended period of time, and just finding more stories to tell.
Yeah.
Right now, with everything that I shot, between the interviews and all of the information I was able to gather, it really feels like a tight 35. But I mean, there's also, again, it's such a it's a town of about 2,500 people population, and pretty much everyone, whether regardless of where they worked or what profession they're normally in, everyone somehow has a story about Star Wars. So I feel like I could probably conduct 2,500 interviews and get 2,500 different stories about Star Wars filming here. So I don't know, maybe it could be a web series or something. But right now, unfortunately, with what I have and what I've shot, it's probably gonna stay 35.
You're right. I
But
think
I would love to come back and do another.
yeah, I think you would need to come back if you were thinking about a feature, because there is an awful lot more to tell. I believe there is an awful lot more to tell about how that film was made in Ireland. Sure, Gary and I live in Ireland, so I haven't seen a single documentary about The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens about how the Irish government were approached, the tourism boards were approached, by Lucasfilm. There isn't anything like that. The president of Ireland was involved behind the scenes, President D. Hughes. This is all untold story stuff, Gary. I'd be right in saying that. I don't think there is anything out there.
And trying to get the information, as somebody who has tried to get it for live shows and panels, it is nigh on impossible to get it done.
Right. Well, maybe it would be great if somebody could put the pressure on, because I'm sure it's a fantastic story. How that film was. Why Ireland? Out of there's so many different. They could have went to Scotland to do some of the stuff. They could have built sets. They saw the Skelligs and they didn't have to go onto the island. They could have built the sets themselves. Why did they come here? Was it Section 4A1, the tax break? Maybe. But that's a story that's waiting to be told.
I think it's a story that deserves to be told as well, because there were a lot of people behind the scenes who will likely remain nameless, who, let's be honest, whether we're talking about whether it was, the let's say the tax benefits or purely something that made sense from a business perspective, there were people involved with those negotiations who would have worked themselves into the ground to make that happen. And I think, at least from the country's point of view and the story of Star Wars in Ireland, maybe it deserves to be told at least one day in some shape or form.
If you look at the credits of the film, right, have a look at the credits of the Last Jedi, okay? Have a look at the amount of trainees that have worked with Irish surnames on that film. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trainees. That would have been a precondition. If you were coming to Ireland, it's a bit like, union rules in the States. It's very similar to over here. You would have to have X amount of trainees working on the films. Now, I know some of those trainees, and they were just delighted to get their names at the end on the credits. There wasn't too much to do. They were basically there to watch.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some great stories from those trainees. I can tell you that as well. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, I know for here specifically, around the Dingle Peninsula, there were about 400 or so of crew members, including principal and everybody. But I mean, they shot all over the Wild Atlantic Way, all over Western Ireland, and they shot all the way up in Donegal. So I feel like that's kind of a story to be told. I haven't been up there myself, but I mean, I'm sure there's some good stuff there. Maybe the next filmmaker that wants to do a documentary can do it on Donegal or something.
I personally want to know why the Falcon was taken down and that Ireland didn't have its own little Hobbiton, which could have been capitalized on. I think it was an enormous missed opportunity from a tourism perspective.
So I don't remember if it was a scene that I ended up cutting or if it was something that I just knew and I didn't put it into the narration. But when Star Wars got permission, Lucasfilm got permission to film here through the Irish government, one of the conditions was that, okay, you can build the set, but it needs to be taken down as soon as you wrap. Whatever land that you touch needs to, when you leave, it needs to be the exact same way you found it.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense given just the environmentalism here. I mean, you guys have a huge benefit of having all of this beautiful land that pretty much seems untouched, as opposed to America, where, you know, it's not taken care of as well as you guys take care of it. I mean, you can even just when you're in, 'cause I'm from New York, so when you're in New York, you know, 1 hour and then 7 hours later you're in Ireland, just you even feel it with the air quality. So I definitely understand why Ireland had instructed Lucasfilm to do that. But dude, it would have been so cool to have the Beehive Hut still there, and maybe the Falcon still wouldn't have been there. The Falcon scene they filmed in Donegal, so the Falcon never made its way to Dingle. But yeah, that would be such a cool tourist attraction.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I get, you know, dismantling sets, you know, and in protected, you know, places in Ireland. I get that. At the same time, you would love to, you know, go inside one of the bee huts, or, you know, see the Falcon. It goes back to, you know, the time around, even back when Ryan's Daughter was shot in Ireland. You know, there was an incredible set on Ryan's Daughter, and that whole set was just completely demolished. That village of Ryan's Daughter was constructed by the crew. When they finished the shoot, the option was there to leave that set. It would have been an enormous tourist attraction, but it was demolished. So we don't like sets.
There's only there's only a few remnants left. There's a really quick shot of it in like the first 7 minutes or so of the movie. There's the remnants of what the schoolhouse looked like. But yeah, I mean, I wish more movies would shoot here, in, you know, in Dingle, but Kerry, you know, very broad. But I mean, it's such a, I hate using this word, but it's such a cinematic town. I feel like you could have a million different movies set here, and each of them feel unique. I mean, there was Ryan's Daughter, Far and Away shot here, kind of out more onto the mainland, and they built sets and whatnot. So it was less specific to Dingle, and of course Star Wars. But I don't know, maybe I'd love to do like a scripted movie here, kind of set some stuff in Dingle. It gives me an excuse to come back and just have a great time here again. I mean, I kind of touch upon it in the movie, but this is the best place in the world.
Damn right it is.
I have Irish heritage, and I have nothing but amazing things to say about my experience here.
The independent film scene in Ireland's booming. It's absolutely booming. So I'm part of an organisation in Dunleary called Underground Cinema, and we're in existence about 14 years. And what we do is we showcase independent Irish and international short and feature films. So over the past 14 years, we've screened just over 6,000 shorts and features that would have more than likely lying in a drawer somewhere on a DVD or on a USB stick. And what we do is we try and showcase these films all over the country, and we're delighted that we're going to be able to showcase your film over the weekend. It's fantastic that we're going to be opening. Yeah, we're going to be opening the festival with 3 really cool films. So we've got Stormtroopers, we've got your documentary, and then we've got Jesper Tone's film, The Last Padawan 2. So that's a really, really good opener for the festival. So we're really looking forward to it tomorrow night. I know you can't make it to it, but you'll be there in spirit with us.
Yeah, I was you know, emailing you guys, and I was still trying to figure out a way to get there even earlier today. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out as much as I want to be there. But it was a great time last year, so I'm sure it's going to be even better this year.
Cool. Well, look, we're going to wrap it up there, Eric. Listen, on behalf of myself and Gary, thanks very much for joining us this evening. And we really look forward to keep in touch with us, and let us know what you're up to now in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Let me know how the festival goes, how the screening goes, and hopefully the audience has good things to say, not great things. I love feedback of all sorts. So whether it's positive or negative, I love hearing what people have to say. So I hope people dig it, and I hope people just have a blast at the festival and celebrate Star Wars in Ireland, because it's an awesome place to celebrate Star Wars. And I mean, if people are sticking around long enough, maybe they can get out to the Skelligs. It's a cool trip.
Cool. Okay, Eric. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
Take care.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
It was great talking to you. Thanks.